Hi, I'm Christy Elaine, and this is Reframing the Narrative. In this video, I'm going to talk about the LGBT community and our history, and because of history being complicated, some of what I discuss in some of the graphic imagery could be disturbing. So, Huey Newton in 1970 talked about the importance of all oppressed peoples working together. He specifically talked about LGBT community and women as groups that Black Americans should find common cause with, regardless of their own views and insecurities about such alliances. Bernie Sanders has done much the same, and for the same reason. Both of them knew the only way oppressed find freedom is by fighting all oppression and making common cause with each other. I've experienced prejudice from many different groups, but I believe prejudice generally comes from ignorance of our history and the realities we all live. And that is why I decided to make this video. I absolutely can't, shouldn't, and won't even pretend to speak for Black Americans. But I can speak about my experience as a Hispanic trans woman and the history of the LGBT rights in America. So let's start with some basic history. In my lifetime, until the year 2003 actually, it was a felony or misdemeanor in much of the US for two adult LGBT individuals to have sexual relations. That would mean if you are watching this right now and are older than 17 and you were alive when being gay was illegal in America. Think about that for a minute. Imagine knowing that if you were caught alone at home with your significant other and you were the same sex, you could be imprisoned, fined, and maybe have to register as a sex offender. That was 2003, not the 60s or 100 years ago, but like when Arrested Development was on television and a couple of years before Gossip Girl and The Office. If you prefer movies, that's around the time Kill Bill came out and Lord of the Rings. There are still laws on the books that legally punish homosexual behavior in some states. Texas has something called a Romeo and Juliet law for heterosexual teens. It basically makes it legal for heterosexual teens to have sexual relations with heterosexual teens, as long as the age gap between them isn't too big. That law specifically doesn't apply to LGBT teens, which means they are potentially subject up to 20 years in prison if they hook up with each other. So, a 16-year-old boy and a 16-year-old girl hook up at a party, totally legal. Two 16-year-old boys hook up at that party and they could be imprisoned for decades and have to register as sex offenders when they get out. That's a law on the books. Now, and then there's marriage equality. I started this channel for my community, but also as a way to explain our situation to non-progressives. I want conservatives and libertarians to have an understanding of what is going on and the impact. Gay marriage was made illegal throughout the entire US in 1996. For our movie and TV buffs, that is when The Craft and Clueless came out, and Friends was on TV. Part of DOMA, the act that made gay marriage illegal, was struck down in 2013. But 2015 is when all states finally had to accept gay marriage. And maybe you're thinking, so what? What does marriage matter? Well, marriage grants a lot of rights in America. It often determines eligibility for benefits at someone's job, including health care. It decides whether you own things you bought with your partner. If something bad happens to one of you, it lets you be the next of kin if that person is ill, or decide how to bury them if the worst happens. And it lets you file taxes as a couple. And that's just off the top of my head. And LGBT people got that right around the time the iPhone 6 came out. And then there's the right to discriminate. The Civil Rights Act was signed into law by LBJ in 1964. Title VII was a huge deal. It protected women and religious minorities and people of color from discrimination at their workplace. It didn't eliminate discrimination, but if someone fired you for your race or gender or religion, it gave you the right to sue them and force them to change their behavior. It didn't protect my community. It didn't protect me. My right to work without discrimination didn't exist until June 15th of 2020. It was still legal to fire me for no reason other than being trans when Rain on Me by Lady Gaga and Break My Heart by Dua Lipa came out and were all over the radio. That was 78 days ago as I record this, and that decision is likely to meet challenges from people who want to be able to discriminate against LGBT people. There's a wave right now of cases involving religious freedom. In the US, when you hear that term, I want you to understand it for what it is. It's code. It is code for instituting Jim Crow-like politics against the LGBT community. And it was used during the civil rights movement the same way against black people. The Bible doesn't support miscegenation. God doesn't believe people should mix. It isn't a new thing. It is saying that separate and unequal is fine. These cases are largely about allowing businesses to refuse service to LGBT people the same way they refused service to black and brown people. Not just the right to purchase items, but sometimes even necessary medical and other services. In order to support that, in order to implement those laws, to believe you don't need to treat LGBT people the same, you have to dehumanize them or believe that they are broken or evil by nature of who they are. And you can see that too in the historical record. LGBT people have legally been murdered in the US for their orientation. They have been institutionalized for it and given therapy that was no better than torture to try to fix them. Therapy that consisted of being electrocuted, given drugs that made them vomit, even forced into sexual situations that amounted to rape. Some of that happened legally as recently as the late 1980s. Right now, reparative and conversion therapy are big among the religious right. They believe, despite all scientific evidence to the contrary, that homosexuality is a choice. Vice did an article a couple years ago on the use of conversion and aversion therapy in the US and said close to 700,000 LGBT Americans had undergone it, about half as kids. Imagine anyone thinking tying down their child and hurting them as they looked at pictures of their gender, or having a therapist tell them who they are is evil, is a good thing. Imagine allowing something like this to happen to your child simply because of the way they were born. I started talking about the importance of binding together. I want to end on that same point. If you aren't LGBT and you're watching this, understand we don't expect you to get what it means to be LGBT. The type of discrimination we face, or the increased risk for assault. But you don't have to get it. The same way I won't ever understand what it means to be a black man or woman in the US. But what you need to do, and I have to do, is say, it isn't okay. It isn't okay what happens to us. It isn't okay what happens to you. And maybe together we can change some of that. I want to take a minute to showcase some organizations trying to make a difference and help out our community. The Trevor Project works with LGBTQIA youth 13 through 24 who are struggling with their sexuality, mental health, or just need someone to talk to. Trans Lifeline helps trans individuals who need support and or help obtaining resources. They also operate a suicide hotline whose phone operators are all a part of the trans community. RAIN, although not specific to the LGBT community, is the largest organization in the US fighting against sexual violence and helping those who have survived it. They can help you understand the legal process if you decide to report an assault and also what steps to take for your own safety going forward. They have probably partnered with a local organization near you and can offer referrals. If you need of any of these resources these organizations offer, I encourage you to contact them. If you do not and still want to show some support for their cause, consider donating to them or other organizations doing similar work. If you are interested in becoming politically active, I encourage you to contact the Human Rights Campaign. They are the largest LGBT lobbying organization in the country and are always looking for volunteers.